Okay, this will be quite a short lecture, and it's just to talk you through some of the rules with regard to naming a variable. Now, many of these rules will also apply to naming a function, so it's important that you pay attention to them. So, firstly, in order to give a variable a name, there are some rules that apply purely to the C compiler, and there are some rules that apply as an etiquette of how you should write your C programs. Okay. So firstly, the rules that apply to the C compiler. You can name your variable, and I'll just put int here for an integer variable. You can give your variable a name that contains any of the characters from A to Z, lowercase, or capital A to capital Z. So any of the alphabetic letters can be used. Okay. You can also use any of the numbers from 0 to 9, but importantly, you cannot use any of the numbers from 0 to 9 as the first character of the name of a variable. So I'll give you an example of that in a moment. And you can use the underscore, okay, but you can't use the hyphen. Okay, the reason you can't use the hyphen is that the hyphen is actually a minus sign, so you can't be used for that. So some of the things that you cannot use are, you can't use any of the arithmetic symbols, so that would be the likes of multiply, plus, you can't use minus, and you can't use divide. So you can't use any of those signs. There are other ones such as the percent sign and so on you can't use. You can't use dots, so you can't use the dot. You can't use apostrophes, like that, okay? And that also goes for the quotes. And the variable name cannot contain any other special symbols such as the @ symbol or the hash symbol, right? And there's a good many more of those, such as the likes of the tilde symbol and that, but they're actually operators, and we'll be seeing those later. So really and truly, you got to stick to this lot up here, which is anything from A to Z in the alphabet, be it uppercase or lowercase, 0 to 9, as long as you don't use it as the first character of the variable, and you can also use the underscore. So I'm going to give you some examples here of ones that are okay. You can say int count. Okay, you can see that the count variable there contains only letters. They're all lowercase as it happens, so that's fine. You could also do something like int. Okay, so you could use one capital letter there. Now, as far as the C compiler there thinks, they are two completely different variables. It doesn't see those as the same at all. The problem is that a human observer that's looking at the program will mix those two up. So it's a very, very bad idea to use that, even though, strictly speaking, the C compiler can tell the difference between them. This is one of the etiquette things that I mentioned. Don't do that, because another programmer that comes looking at it is not going to be able to make sense of it. Now, so we can say num1. Okay, that's another one that will work. It uses only lowercase letters and a digit there. We cannot, however, say int1 num like that. That's not permitted. Even though we said above that we could use any of the digits from 0 to 9, we can't do it as the first character, so be wary of that. Let's say I wanted a variable that was something like number of students. I could say int num of. Okay, that's the way I would tend to write it, where I split up the words with capital letters at the beginning of each word. That's how I tend to do it. There is another way where you can kind of go something like int num of, like that. So you separate them with underscores, which, as we said above, is permitted. Okay. Now, what is not permitted is a space. So be wary of that one. You can't do that sort of thing. Be also wary of that, by the way, in the name of your file. So when you're going save as and you're saving it as something, don't leave spaces there. You can get away with it sometimes, but otherwise sometimes you can't, and it can cause problems with the compiler. So try to stay away from that sort of thing. The other thing just to mention is that you should not have two variables that have the same name. That may not seem like a massive problem in your small programs, but when you get into programs that have millions of lines of code, there has to be a whole system for making sure that two names do not get mixed up. You can use the same name twice in a program that's millions of lines of code if you have them in specific places where they won't conflict with each other, but you also have to be very wary that a human observer is not going to get them mixed up as well. That's for later on in the course when we start talking about scope of variables and things like that. But for the moment, just take it that you shouldn't use the same variable names in two different places. Also, don't use any of the C keywords. I mentioned that there are 32 keywords in C. I might post up the 32 keywords in Moodle at some stage. I don't think I have them there at the moment. But there are 32 keywords, and they would include the likes of int, float, char, as we've seen. Main will be another one. Although main is just going to get mixed up with the other things. Something like if, for, unsigned is one. There's an else. Okay, so that's just a few of the examples. Now I'll give you the whole 32 at some point, but you can't use any of those. Also, you've seen situations where we're using the printf function. Don't give a variable name that's the same as the name of a function, because it won't be able to tell between the two. Okay, so there are some of the rules that are associated with naming a variable. You need to also make sure that you don't, that when you're writing functions, that they obey the same set of rules. The last thing is just as regards the etiquette of naming variables within C. The compiler won't mind if you call your integer okay, but the problem is that a human observer is not going to know what that means. So when another programmer looks at it, they have no idea that that's to do some particular thing. So always give it a name that makes sense, such as the example up above, int num of students. That tells us that in the program the number of students is going to be held within that variable. That's fairly obvious. Okay, if I call that variable chyrt, you wouldn't have a clue of what that meant. Okay, so there are some of the rules. Try and keep them in mind whenever you're writing your variable names.